Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of my Genealogy Live interviews. Tonight I have on the hostess with the mostest. You'll know what I'm referring to if you listen to the podcast. Carolynn Lochlainn of Ancestors and Live Genealogy, who does the From Paper to People podcast. So I shall bring her on. And hello,
Hi,
Carolynn.
everybody. Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm having a little tea here and just hanging out and expecting that a cat might come join us at any moment.
Ah, yes, Santa Morgan.
Santa Morgan or Shukran, the original. She was the original patroness, and then of course Santa Morgan came along and just horned her right out of the way.
Okay, then let's get right into it. So, why don't you introduce yourself to those who may not have heard of you?
Well, if you haven't heard of me, I'm terribly hurt and offended. So I'm a genealogist. I sometimes work for money, although most of the time I don't. I do a lot of pro bono. I've been doing research either on my own family or somebody else's since I was 15. So goes Gen Z, Jen. I love that. And so I've been working now for, this will be 41 years this summer.
Wow.
That I've been doing this. I know. And so through thick and thin, whether it's in an archive or a library or on my computer, I've been doing research. And I've developed some pretty specific skills and interests. But I think that one of the things that we need to do as individual genealogists, whether we're professional or not, is to help one another and to find ways to be of service and to use our skills for social justice. So that's really what it's all about for me.
Fair enough. So you are quite experienced, clearly, with the amount of work that you do in the genealogy field. But how did it all start?
It started the way that so many things start. Somebody else had started the work. Let's see. Okay, so I was born and raised with the surname Mclaughlin, which is a fairly common in the Northern O'Neill. It's a very fairly common surname. And so at 15, my uncle, who had gotten the work from my granduncle, said, I'm going into disability retirement. I'm moving away from Washington, D.C. I don't have access to a lot of the records anymore. Here, you want this? He literally gave me a stack of papers. And I said, okay. And it was all about the Mclaughlin family. And our people came here to the United States rather earlier than the average for Irish Catholics. They all arrived in the 1830s, which is what? 17, 18, 20 years before the Blight. So that made them a little bit harder to trace and a little bit more uncommon. And there are still things I don't know. But it started with going to the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, where my family had colonized and settled in the 1830s. And very oddly, walking into the churchyard and looking at headstones and seeing a nun and saying to the nun, I'm a Mclaughlin and I'm looking for my family. And she looked at me and she said, I'm a Mclaughlin. And I'm from New York. I'm not from Pennsylvania, let alone that far of a drive. It's a long drive. And it was an extraordinary feeling. And we all got together and started talking stories, and they filled in blanks for us and we for them. And it went from there. And it's, I want to say it's an addiction, except that it's not an addiction, because that implies that it's an illness, and it's not. It's healthy. I've always had a strong tie to my ancestors. And so this was a way to just key into that I'm a history geek. I've always been a history geek. And so that was really basically how I got into it, was being handed off these records. And from there, it blew up into looking at other areas of the family. But, you know, when I was a 15-year-old kid, nobody talked that much about women's history. So it was really about looking and searching patrilineally. And if you stumbled on something about a woman, well, that's sort of nice. And so that's given me a lot to do now, is to catch up that ground. And in fact, my mother's side of the family has been easier to research because they're the people who come from massively record-keeping groups of people, the New Amsterdam Dutch, and I don't know, a bunch of other lines that are basically fairly heavily documented. So my dad's lines are some of the ones that are lost in the mists.
Yeah, I know the feeling, because a good section of mine does like to disappear off the map quite a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There was one great grandparent of mine, and I cannot find a death search for them, no matter how hard I try. But I guess the fact that they had the name John probably didn't help, and the most commonest book surname in that area probably didn't help either. So it didn't really help that part. So yeah, that's just one of the love and joys of genealogy: common names.
Absolutely.
Especially if there's like if they're like a particular region, if they're like, because like the names that I'm researching are sadly all common to that area. There's no like individual odd ones that came from another county that went to Mayo. They were all from there, and the names are there from as far as you can go back. So that never helped me much.
In this crowd of people, what happened with the Mclaughlin's was that 5 brothers, 4 of whom were married, 1 of whom did not marry, and he just disappears. So we have a kind of an assumed death period or date-ish for him. The other 4 brothers married, and they all named all their kids after each other. And so everybody is James, a Patrick, a Charles, a William, you know, I mean, and it's an Edward, and it's on and on and on. And it's all Mclaughlin's. And the really funny part is we don't know, I haven't weeded through it to figure it out for sure with DNA, but I do know other people named Mclaughlin from this county, then this town, Clarion, in the northwest corner of Pennsylvania. And it seems that even though they're Mclaughlins, they're actually not close relatives of ours. And and yet they all kind of arrived at the same time. I don't know how they swung that. I really don't know how that got managed. But there are other first names and first naming patterns in their families that show that they are something else altogether. But the Irish line, then of course, that I'm very interested in finding out more about is the Ruane and Christie, or Christian, we're not sure which line. They're from Mayo, and it turns out, from what I've found so far, that Ruanes come from Mayo, and they sort of don't come from any place else. So all of the Ruane cousins I found through DNA settled in Philadelphia or within miles of Philadelphia in New Jersey. And their people all came over in the early 20th century, and ours came over 100 years before. And it seems that everybody's related, and everybody was sending everybody else letters saying, hey, jobs are good, come on over. And somehow I am hooked into those folks. But Ballina seems to be the area in Ruanesville, you know, in Mayo that we're looking at, but not super sure yet. That's one that's going to be plumbed only with on location work. The thing is that my work has changed. You know, initially I was talking to people, getting folklore, and which is an enormous part of what I believe is important in genealogy, and then doing the work from documents in institutions, in libraries and archives and things. Almost exclusively now, really exclusively at this moment, especially, it's online work. It's just online work. There's no other way to do it, and that's why I've kind of moved myself away from. I sort of don't necessarily refer to myself as a genealogist these days. I'm more of a tree technician. I will build you that tree in 24 hours or less, because what I do is I work with what I can find online, and I just have that kind of bloodhound thing going. So I can tell when I'm in the right place and when I'm not. And some areas of the United States more so than others, but I really only work in United States records. Also, I don't even really work very much in Canadian records these days. And my people are all Northern and Western Europeans. So any work that I've done for myself has really only been in. Everybody got here. 1830 is the last people who arrived here.
Right.
Well, they came over on the Mayflower to Jamestown. So like 1607, 1620. That's when my folks were arriving. 1630s was the height of their migration. So I don't get into international records very much at all. So it's pretty much online.
Yeah. And even now, it kind of shows us like how much online has become a right resource, because so like some people might be hesitant to try and get their stuff up, but it's not so much weird, but the more obscure records that aren't necessarily the same, like vital ones, birth, marriage, deaths, burials, that kind of a thing. But it could be like the minutes from society that the person may have been in, but it's not digitized, it's not online. But
exactly.
It kind of shows, there does need to be digitization happening, especially in these times, because people are going to go like, oh, I wouldn't mind this, but I can't go anywhere.
Yeah. It's very frustrating. There are some things about my own family, and I don't really work on my own family very much at all. But if there were some things that I would like to do here in my hometown, it turns out, just oddly, in 2011, I figured out that this town that I grew up in New York on Long Island, we only moved out here when I was 2 years old. My parents were both born and raised in the Midwest. Pardon me for a moment. I need to sniffle. I shall return. The allergies here are going nuts. The dust is high. What can I say? Anyway, so we had no idea in deeper senses a lot of times where folks were from. And in 2011, I figured out that some of the founding white colonizing families of this town are my direct line ancestors. They set up shop in 1653, along with some of the Dutch. And you could have knocked me over with a feather. And so there are in the town's archives things that I would really like to look at, but I can't yet. I can't now. Before I wanted to, and I couldn't make time. And now I wish I could, get down there on my day off. That would be really nice. So certainly there's that, but there are things where I would like to go to South Carolina and sort through some things with the surname Odom and try to figure some things out there. And there are other, one of the great American jokes in genealogy is the surname Williams, because everybody's got Williamses and none of them are related. And is it Irish? Is it Scottish? Is it Welsh? Is it English? Or is it anglicized from another European language? It's ridiculous. So I've got Williamses coming out my ears, and I'd like to sort through some things there. I'd like to just go to Tennessee and look around in a couple of counties and poke around and see if I can't find some stuff out. it's not the season to do that right now, and it hasn't been for over a year now. And there's no substitute for doing what you can do online instead. Someone in my podcast group, because I have a Facebook group for my podcast, From Paper to People, and this person said, "Well, I think is it ever done? Is the work ever done?" And I said, "No." And and the person said, "Well, I think I've done everything that I can on my tree." And I said, "So help somebody else." Because that's the next thing that you do is if you really swear and promise that you're done with every single little thing in your family, it's time for you to turn around and look at somebody and say, "Hey, you want to work together on your family? I got some skills and let's have some fun. And we'll learn some stuff you didn't know about yourself and let's go for it." So that's really what this season has been about. And the funny thing is I tend to anticipate these things. Like I'd already been ordering in meat and vegetables and basic produce for a year when the quarantine hit. It was over a year. It was in October of the year before. And we started quarantining. Well, we started lockdown in March, of course, of last year. And so I was prepared. I've been working from home on genealogy for years. And so I was ready. So when this happened, everybody's like, "Oh, I hate this and it's so awful and different." And I'm like, is it though? Is it really? It's not that different because it wasn't for me. Now I'm sick and tired of it and I want some warm weather and I want to get outside and I want to do some stuff. But different.
Yeah,
not different.
One of my projects at the moment, which I really need to get onto, is my one-place study. And where my one-place study is, I'm nowhere near it. So I can't exactly go up there and go like, right, let's go and take some photos of the locality and things and use that. And no, I can't. I have to wait until, because we have restrictions where we can't go 5K outside our house. Unless for like shopping or something. So I've been stuck in my house for quite a while. But no, like we've gone back to school, so it's fine. I'm getting out. I'm flying from the nest, so to speak. No, I just saw this now, and sorry for the person that sticked it up, but if anyone watching now has any questions for Carolyn, please stick it in the comments because I can do this. And it shows up.
Well, PJ, as it happens, I do have a little bit of a thing. I do what I call reparational genealogy. And what that is, basically, it's got a lot of arms and tentacles. But one of the main ways that it manifested in the beginning was I found my first enslaving ancestor. And that was also in 2011. 2011 was a busy year for me. Richard Chenoweth and his wife, Margaret McCarthy, I guess. He was the contractor who built the fort that became Louisville, Kentucky. He was a contractor with the Commonwealth of Virginia to do that work. And he was also an enslaver. And he also really liked running around and getting all of the girls in the town, like all of the unmarried women, pregnant. But that's like a whole other story. So Richard, I didn't know that Richard was an enslaver. I knew a couple of things about him. I knew the things that popular history wanted me to know about him, like that his family suffered the last Native American attack on Kentucky ground. The Shawnee people did not like that their land was being stolen from them. I wonder why. And attacked this outpost where the family lived and killed some of the members and took one of the sons away with them. And as I was looking at all these records and these stories, I found a slave schedule. And it showed that there were enslaved people living in the Chenoweth household on the Chenoweth land. And it was a jaw dropper for me, not because I was surprised that there are enslavers, but simply because I didn't realize that my family was going to be one of the families that I ran into that in, because I didn't I had this impression that people who enslaved were rich and my people weren't rich, therefore they didn't enslave. That's total nonsense. That's absolute nonsense. And I started to learn a lot of things that were absolute nonsense. So the first thing was I started to think about, how can I make these records available so that Black researchers who are looking for people whom in their family lines, whom they know were enslaved in certain areas or by certain names. If I have wills or other papers like that that actually name people, how can I get that stuff out there? Well, that's the number one way to perform reparational genealogy. It's a reparation to give people information about their families, because after all, we were the ones who stole all that and destroyed all the families in the first place. But then it takes other forms. And so one of the things I'm doing right now is I'm working on a kind of a one-place study for all of the Black families pretty much on Long Island, dating from the colonial period forward through to the 20th century. And there's some intermarriage, and all of the Black families have surnames that parallel white families' surnames. And there was a lot of enslavement here, but then there was also a lot of manumission here, so that people did become free, but they were still living in their own world, basically, because, if you're Black, you're not white, right? How else do you say it? Whiteness prevails. So basically, it's been an interesting process, because I'm coming across all these surnames and I know them, and these surnames pertain to people I went to high school with. And I'm saying to a friend, oh, well, I found this, and he's like, yeah, that's my cousin's family. Oh, okay. So I'm doing that work too. I also work on trees for people who've been lynched. And the attempt there, as well as people who are famous in the Black community, not known in the white community. There's plenty of that, because we do not know our own history here in the United States, or people who've lived interesting lives or died tragic deaths. And when I say lynched, I mean people from 1619 to who was most recently killed by a cop. I'm talking the whole run of time. And to work those trees and make those available on FamilySearch.org as a part of the One World Family Tree. And the reason that I do that, even though those folks are not my family necessarily, is that I believe that anyone who is descended of an enslaved person, or for that matter, just any person of color in this world, in this country, in this community that the United States has become, deserves to have all access to everything possible genealogical, whether it's research or DNA, for free. And that's just how I feel about it. I'm pretty angry that a lot of other people don't feel the same way. I don't understand why. I'm a lawyer, and part of what we were trained to do is to provide pro bono hours, so that, for every so many hours worked paid, an attorney will provide some hours as a public defender or something like that, in a non-paid position, to people who, deserve better service than what they're getting. And this isn't me being a savior. This is just me trying to do something that I think all white genealogists should be doing, using talents and consecrating talents to this kind of work, so that people who are known for, say, a horrible, grisly death, instead of being just known as a person who died horribly, they're known as, oh, well, that was a brother and an uncle and a dad and a son, and he worked and he had fun and he was a person. And raising names to a place of being known as human beings. That's what this is all about, because my ancestry on both sides of my family has dehumanized African descended people. And So I want to be a part of doing something that's a humanization process, that gives people back a sense of self. And that, I mean, I'd love to break down racism. That would really be nice. I don't know, though. I don't think that's possible. But that's a very long answer to your question, PJ. That's what I do. And it's very, very important to me. It's at the core of what I do.
And I think you did a very good explanation of that, because I think that's one of the main things that I know you for. That and your podcast. But yeah, I think you are doing the right thing by doing that, I think.
I really, the one thing that I find really dismaying is I say, okay, so who's going to help? Come on, y'all. Let's step up. Come on. You can do it. You don't have to work only on your own family. You've got time. So step up and help me out with this. And people mean well, and they say they're going to help out, and they even do for a little while. But it's like, seriously, for a couple days. And then they allow themselves to be drafted back into working on their own families. And maybe I've had a really long time to work on my family. And so it's kind of like, yeah. And I don't really, I'm not as thrilled. I don't know. And so it's easy for me to divert away. And so maybe I'm being a little judgmental there. I don't know. But, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't feel like I have the skills. Well, how do you think I developed them? Nobody has taught me anything. I've never taken a class. I've never taken a seminar. I have never watched a Roots Tech talk. I'm trying to rectify that within the next year, but I haven't. I just haven't. I haven't had the money, and I haven't had the time. And so I teach myself, and I do things wrong. And then I figure out the right way to do them. And then I look around and see how other people are doing stuff. And if it's not explained in a way that I understand, I find a way to explain it that makes sense. And then bam, I slap it into my podcast. And that's how it works. So I wish more people would say, okay, the next year, I'm going to work 1 day a week on my own family. And then the other 6 days, when I work on genealogy, I am working on reparational work. And so far, it hasn't happened.
But you could also say that, so like, even if they do, so like some days, like they don't have to do, like, I know I'm probably going to sound mean here, but they don't always have to do, 6 days a week doing reparation.
No, yeah.
And it's in moderation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if a person said, well, every Sunday for 4 hours, I'm going to dedicate myself to working on a reparational tree.
Yeah.
In a group with other people, which is what I've tried to do, is to get 3 to 4 people onto a tree and say, okay, guys, just chime in and say, well, I'm working on such and so, I'm working on such and such, and just start working backwards, working documents only. If you get hung up, give me a holler. That's how I want to do it. I do want to make it bite-sized. It's hard because I can see how, if you want to learn how to do something new, and working in Black records, it is new, my friends. It is new, my white friends. It is different. It is absolutely different, because communities gather in different ways. They raise children according to different guidelines because of what they were forced into because of enslavement and Jim Crow. And that's just the way that it is. So you have to get used to a lot of things, and you'll end up, in doing reparational work for just one person, you'll end up doing, in essence, a one-place study. Because if you're shrubbing your tree out, going sideways as well as back, and not just doing this, but going like this again and again and again, like a weeping willow, then the kind of work that you do is you end up circling back, and it's like, oh, so-and-so's cousin married so-and-so's brother-in-law. Now I understand how those families interlock. It does take time to get accustomed and to feel comfortable. And it does take time to make a connection to the ancestors, because they will tell you where to go. You just have to listen. And I have to listen. There are days when my connection is not that good. There are days when it's really good. And I know for me that I had to do full immersion in order to get comfortable. But you're absolutely right. I mean, that's just me. I'm a harsh taskmaster, And so yeah, I mean, if you want to just take it in bites, that's good too. The point is to do it. You know?
Yeah. No, that is true. So, obviously, you will have dealt with a lot of resources either in your reparational work or your own family's history. But is there one that you found most useful? If there's a number of them, that's fine. But is there one in particular?
Okay, so one of my favorite things is on Ancestry, and it's the city directories. The United States had city directories, which were like enhanced white pages, telephone books. So for a married couple, say, they would list the husband and the wife, and they would list where they lived, and then they would list where he worked. And there are times when there's a brief marriage and you can't find any vital records for that marriage, and you can't find the woman's name, let alone any kind of a maiden name. But if you're sure you've got the right guy, and there are all those, okay, I'm crossing over the age with the place, with all of these things to make sure this is the same person. If all of a sudden this guy who had a wife named Sarah, we know Sarah died from Sarah's records, and all of a sudden there's Mabel. Okay, then. He has a marriage we need to account for, pop her in the tree and see what pops up. But I love city directories because they give you a flavor for what part of town people live in. You can Google Maps that and then look and see maybe even the building still, exists. For my Rouen people, who came over in the 1830s, the row house that they lived in 1877 is still standing in Philadelphia. And it's a little down on its luck, but it's an amazing thing to be able to use that city directory. So I love those. I don't know whether there's a parallel in Australian, UK, Canadian, or other records that Ancestry might provide, but certainly that's an American collection I enjoy. I love a good death certificate. But I love a good death certificate. Least possible reliability for birthplace and birth date that you could ever come up with in your life, which can actually be kind of fun sometimes because it's like, really? You thought she was 20 years younger than she was? That's okay. All right. But all of the stuff about, I guess I'm just a horrible person. I like to know how people died. If there's disease that runs in a family, I want to know about it. And who signed the death certificate? So who was the person in the family who came forward? That's interesting. That lets you know some stuff about who's operating how in a family. My great grand aunt and great grand uncle died on the same day. My great grand uncle worked at everybody was in oil, and they lived in Oklahoma, and he was working at not a pumping station, at a pipeline, and there was an explosion, and he basically got hit with shrapnel from that, and he was in the hospital for, I don't know, a day, and then he died, and they had no children, and she went home, his wife, and picked up a gun and shot herself to death. And so my great-grandfather had to sign off on those two death certificates, which were consecutively numbered in that county. And he couldn't remember and didn't provide his own parents' names for his brother, but he was able to remember his sister-in-law's father's name in providing parental information for the deceased. Right there, that tells a story of grief, and it tells a story of the strangeness of how the mind works when under extreme stress. So, yeah, I'm kind of creepy and everything, but also you get a lot of stories. You find out a lot of information. I like to know who people were. That's very important to me. That's why I call the podcast From Paper to People. It's actually about something. It's about how people can be found and claimed and translated out of ink on paper. So those are probably my two favorites.
Yeah. And when you kind of said that you think you're a horrible person, first of all, you're not. Second of all, I can understand that, because so some people might want to know if there's a history of, I don't know, I'm picking things here, heart disease or something that they don't know about, and they want to see if it exists in the family. So they might investigate about that. And to see who signed it, again, not creepy. I like it. It's helped me fill in many gaps in my tree. So it's you're not creepy when you say that. I can assure you that now. So, what projects or ventures are you currently pursuing?
Well, I've got this this sort of I don't know that you would call it. Maybe it's a one-place study. I don't know what you would call it, but this study of all of the Black and Shinnecock Native American families, because there was a lot of intermarriage among the Shinnecock and Black folks here, because basically, you know, anybody who wasn't white got to intermarry, but that wasn't necessarily what happened a whole lot in the 18th and 19th centuries here. And so I'm working on that. That's for the town historian for the town of Huntington. A distant cousin of mine, it turns out, is also contributing to it. It's on Family Search, and he stumbled across me and said, "I agree with you. Other people's trees are crap." Which I thought was funny. And I was like, well, he must have looked me up in order to know that that's what I say all the time. So that was kind of funny. So I'm working on that. And I have a friend's tree I'm working on that's a reparational tree. I have yet to send her some DNA, a DNA test, but a foundation gave me a DNA test and said, this is for reparational work. Just let us know, you know, who takes it and what happens. And so I'm like, okay. And otherwise, I mean, I don't know, this is probably before your time, but there was a runner in the Olympics. She was known as FloJo, Florence Griffith Joyner, and her husband, Al Joyner, is a former runner, and her sister-in-law was a runner as well. And everybody was either coaching or running in the Olympics together. And FloJo died young. And a friend posted something about her. And I thought, you know, I'll bet you anything that tree isn't on as part of the tree on the One World Family tree at Family Search. And sure enough, it wasn't. There were like 3 or 4 people there, and somebody had done the work in French. And I thought, she deserves better than that. And so at this point, I've gotten all of her mother's family on there, and I've traced her back to free people of color during enslavement, starting with someone who was born in the 1790s. So that's pretty cool. And on her dad's side, folks were born into enslavement. So it's an interesting tree because there are 2 very different things going on from 2 very different states and very different situations during enslavement. I've also just got this, my cell phone. I've got the Family Search app. I've always disparaged Family Search at least a little bit, sometimes a lot. And I've become comfortable enough with Family Search. I still do my research on Ancestry first. And once it's perfected there, then I transfer it over. That's something I can do because I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have a little pass-through keyhole that allows me to transfer all the data for an individual person at once, along with all of the citations and support data. But what I'm doing now is I'm just working on Family Search, whatever comes in front of me. It's not my family. I started by looking at an in-law of a cousin. And as soon as you start to add people to Family Search, you're the one who gets the hints. You're the one who gets the message saying, hey, there's stuff going on here. And so at night for at least an hour, maybe 2, I sit and I work on Family Search on the Family Tree app. and I just add records, merge duplicates, and clean stuff up. Last year, they're called contributions, whether you add a person, you add a record, whatever. I had over 13,000 contributions last year. Right now, for 2021, I have 11,000. And so my goal is to just blow the top off of it and to just keep doing everything I can to make that one world tree the best possible tree, so that when people do come into it, like Latin American folks, like African American folks, like Native American folks, at least in the case of the records I'm working in that are Shinnecock, there's a familiarity, and it's possible to actually find, oh my gosh, somebody has already added some information here. I do belong on this platform, because right now Family Search is a very white platform. And so I'm working to clean it up and to darken it up a little bit, get some more research from other parts of the world on there. It's important. So those are basically what's going on.
I was just about to say, with your contributions, I see the kind of routine, regular updates on your Instagram and Twitter feeds. And so I say, look how much I've done. And it's like, yeah, I wouldn't be able to do that much. I know that. I can tell you that hands down straight away.
It's actually, once you get used to it, it's super easy. But it is a thing where, Family Search is not a friendly platform on which to do research. It's a great place to put research that's been vetted elsewhere. And then you can add the census records and things like that within the Family Search database on as double insurance, for any given family. But the thing that's really important is sometimes I have to go, I don't know this family that well, and I don't know whether that looks right. I'm just going to back away slowly, and I'm going to go over here and work with something else instead. So sometimes I get a little overwhelmed with that. But the other thing that I'm doing also, I've outlined a book. It's called There Were Two Sisters, or it's going to be called There Were Two Sisters Side by Side. I don't know if you know that song, Sing I Dum, a Sing I Day. Yeah, it's quite a nice little Irish folk song that I enjoy. And it's about my great-grandmother and her sister, and how my great-grandmother lived a comfortable, successful, middle-class life. And her sister, my great-grandaunt, lived a horrible, miserable life, and caught on fire and died on Easter morning. And her abusive husband died a year later, and most of her children didn't survive the age of 7, and she had 14 children, and they were put in orphanages and insane asylums. And it's an absolutely horrendous Gothic, but I'm creepy, so I like it, story, and the juxtaposition of those two lives. And my contention is that my great-grandmother survived and lived well at the expense of her sister. And so I have a lot of records I've been able to get already from archives and things. But once things open up, I'm on the open road, and I'm headed to Indiana because I've got a lot to do there. So part of what I'm doing is working other records on other people in that county and in that little town to start to get to understand who is who, and what names are important to this story, and who might have known who might have known my great-grandaunt or my great-grandmother. So that's another thing. Basically, it's a very, very short outline right now.
Right.
I have to sit down and write.
Yeah, that too. So what, obviously, like you said, you've been doing it from quite a young age, so you would have accumulated a lot of experience in multiple fields. So is there anything that you now know that you wish you knew at the start?
Folklore is a lot more important than I thought it was. I have 2 episodes from season 1 on folklore, and one is called Just the Facts, Ma'am. And the idea is, okay, so what you're doing is you're asking for birth dates and birthplaces, and marriage dates and marriage places, and divorce dates and divorce places, and death dates and death places. You're asking for names. You're asking for all of that on people's children or whatever, right? And you're trying to build facts to have a framework from which to work. But then there's another one called the glory of the story. And the glory of the story is what I didn't understand. And the fact that the two things are different from one another and have the ability to be appreciated juxtaposed to one another and to be appreciated standalone. So the stories that my ancestors told of our family from Ahanlu Parish in Derry, in Limavady in Derry, are almost all crap. But they illuminate how storytellers think of themselves. And that's really important. So we have wonderful recordings that my uncle did in talking to a couple of my great uncles and to my great grandmother and to my grandmother. And I am so lucky that he did that. And I did an episode where I talked to my dad about his life. And I've talked with him before and either made notes or recorded things. One time I recorded and then it got deleted somehow from the cloud magically. And I'm very annoyed about that. But the importance of asking a general question and sitting back and being quiet and letting someone tell a story. And it doesn't matter. I think I didn't understand that you don't have to hammer away at people and say, but what was that? But when that was that? But how did that happen? Just let them talk. And if you need to do the follow-up, then do the follow-up of when did this happen? How old were you? That kind of thing. Because ultimately those stories and those recordings of stories, those are things that need to be handed down. And, my dad is telling stories now that I've heard before, but occasionally he tells me things that I've never heard before, or I come to understand he feels a certain way about something that I didn't know. And now I understand his motivation about why being in the Air Force was so important to him, but his extremely internationally prominent corporate job, where he worked with all kinds of people and, met film stars and on all this kind of stuff, was not that important to him. And that's something that I get to hand down. So the importance of knowing when to be quiet and the importance of simply doing those interviews in the first place. I wish I had known more about that because I started studying folklore as a folklore major as a freshman when I was 18 years old. And it taught me how, but it didn't teach me common sense. So I've got missed opportunities. I wish I had taken opportunities that I didn't.
Right. So, is there a particular aspect of genealogy that you like the most? So, like finding records, stories, photos.
I love photos, but people tend to scan them too small, and that makes me really mad. When you're going to scan photos, scan at 600 DPI. Make them big. Okay, that's important. But I think my favorite thing is I love triangulating in DNA, taking somebody's DNA and looking at their closest cousin and then working backwards on that closest cousin and then coming back down and finding that most recent common ancestor, helping people with that work. I was doing that when I was doing paid work this time last year, and I missed that. That's a lot of fun. But otherwise, it's just the systematic nature of it. I have ADD and I have some other intellectual or neurological kind of weirdnesses about me. And so I don't work the way that other people might be taught to work or something. I've never responded well in a classroom type situation to certain kinds of things. And I never liked math, and I was never very good at math except when I was being very closely coached. But there's something about building a tree and being systematic in it. Go back to the person, work everything there. Okay, now go over here. Now work everything over here. Okay, now go over here, work everything here. And just going through that is very comforting for me, especially now. Life is fraught. I'm a contact tracer. My job now is to research names and dates and phone numbers of people we're trying to find to put on quarantine. It doesn't end, and it's like having a gun held to your head. It just doesn't end. 6 hours of sitting and researching. That's all I do. And to be able to ease myself back into something where it's a system that I've created, and I've created it for me, and it works for some other people too, but it doesn't work for everybody. Other people have ways that work better for them. I like just the simplicity of building a tree and finding something and going, wow, this is so cool. Yesterday, I found that my fourth cousin, 4 times removed, had as a servant in his home, but not a slave because he was a free person of color, one of the men I am researching in this sort of one-place study of local Black families in 1850 in the census. Love it when little things like that show up. You know?
Nice. So, what isn't now? Again, it's up to you if you want to share this. I can easily move on if you want. But what's an interesting story or event that you've discovered about your ancestors?
Oh my gosh, there are so many. I mean, there are so many. Okay, so I'm going to totally throw my grandfather under the bus on this. Okay. My mother's father was a total narcissist, and he was an only child, and his mother was one of the 2 women in my book. Okay. In my story, I should say, because it's not a book yet. And he was all about intelligence. He thought this was so important that people get their IQs tested. And he was really into like eugenics, which was founded in the United States pretty much in the town he was born in at about the time he was born. So I guess that makes sense. Jeffersonville, Indiana, dubious claim to fame. And for his entire life, he was all about that. And a story that I found was in researching these cousins of his, these first cousins of his, I don't know whether he knew they existed or not, but one of them lived until 1967. And in the year that my grandfather, a career surgeon for the Army who did gut surgery, was teaching in New York City at a college and a college of medicine, and was getting his IQ tested, insisting, I have the paperwork to show it, insisting that he belongs in Mensa and that he needed to be tested again to make sure that his score was right. At that very same time, his only living first cousin was dying of intestinal cancer at an insane asylum in Indiana. And I really don't know whether my grandfather knew about that cousin or not. And it makes me wonder, but it opens a lot of doors. It makes me reconsider his life in some ways. And it makes me reconsider his mother in some ways, because she could have taken on these orphaned nieces and nephews, and she didn't. She had a solid marriage. Her husband had a good income. She had just had my grandfather, and she had the opportunity to take in these children, and she didn't. And they got sent to the 4 winds. That's kind of an amazing story to me. One of the early stories that was a great one to learn that my dad knows really better than I is Charles Mclaughlin Jr., because there were 3 of them. Senior came over from, of course, right? Charles William. Senior came over from Ireland with his wife, Elizabeth McCall. And Charles was one of the kids from that marriage. And he fought in the Civil War, and finding out that he was wounded taken prisoner. Robert E. Lee traded him for Southern prisoners that the North was holding. And then learning more about that he went to hospital in Philadelphia during the war to be treated for this mini ball. It was a bullet, this bullet hole in his leg. And one of the nurses that was treating him was Margaret Agnes Ruane, and he married her.
Oh,
which I love. I love that. I just love that so much. Just recently saw a picture of her for the first time, and I look so much like her. It's really kind of creepy. From the 5 head and the hooded eyes and the nose shape, I mean, just right down the road. It's just, I mean, if I just did this, if I just got my comforter up, over my head, the way the little old Irish ladies of the Iron Islands and such do. Okay, this is pretty much my second great grandmother, only without the glasses. It's freaky. But my most favorite stories are always about other people's people, because, and this will sound weird, but it is true. I get visits from other people's family when I'm working on their trees, and they tell me where to go, and they give me information to pass on. And piecing those lives together, I learn so much. My ancestors don't show up in the same way. It's very odd. I don't know why that is. But there's that, or there's of course the really big one when I found out that my grandmother's grandfather, who was like Mr. Respectability, Irish, not Irish, what do you call it? Lace, they had lace wraps for their rolls with, on the table, on their lace tablecloths and dinner and everything in Iowa and Nebraska. After 15 years of marriage to my second great grandmother, I guess it is, he went back home to visit in Illinois and found a girl that he liked and married her, and proceeded to commute between the two places. And in 1894, he had 2 daughters, one with each wife. And piecing together how the family knew about it or when, and how his first family covered for the fact that he wasn't around when my second great grandmother died, was really weird and sad and interesting. He had already been dead for 5 years, and they're like, oh, he died within 36 hours of her and they're being buried together. No, he was already buried in Illinois and she's being buried in California, but okay, you go ahead. So, weird stories, just weird stuff comes up, the more you look, all of a sudden an ancestor will just be like, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then, you start to do the research and it's like, holy crap, look at this. So, that's the kind of thing that happens. I mean, but there are a ton of stories. Finding all the stuff that I've told in the podcast is stuff that's really important, like, Building a Life, John Delane, when I found that my granduncle, I never knew him. He died when I was like 2 or 3, but he had a first wife, and they'd been shot because the bullet that was shot at him and meant for him went through his shoulder, hit her in the neck, and killed her. It was a barroom brawl in Texas.
Good Lord.
Crazy stuff. So I just found her first husband too, just a couple weeks ago. I finally found her first husband in records. So she's all pieced together and everything's ready to rock on for her family. Should they, turn up and decide they want to look at stuff in Family Search, they will find everything there, but I don't know. I mean, it's always the creepy and weird stuff that's my thing. I really like the creepy and weird stuff.
Well, I can probably say as genealogists, we're all interested in that sort of thing. That isn't new.
Yeah, that's why people don't like to talk to us at cocktail parties. Because we
Oh
bring
yeah.
up the creepy stuff and they're just like, okay, kind of like, thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, they're just inching away and going to play poker in the other room. They don't want to hear it. But yeah, we'll sit around and tell creepy stories all day. I love me some creepy stories. I don't know. There's so much. And the great thing is that it's taken me 40 years, 40 years to learn this much.
Hmm.
And now we have DNA technology. And there's a whole lot more that I need to piece together that's going to be through DNA as well as through traditional research, even on location research. I can't even imagine what it is that I'm going to know when I'm 96 instead of 56, because I'll be alive and kicking and mean. I'll be alive and kicking and mean because that's what I've promised myself. And I'll know so much more crazy stuff. I mean, in the next 5 years, who even knows what I'll know?
Hmm. Oh
You know,
yeah, it's true. You never know where it's going to go in the future.
absolutely.
It can go any which way. So, what does genealogy mean to you?
I think that it means leaving the phone off the hook, and they're on the other side, on the other end. Um, I mean, I have conversations with these people. I know people whom I've never met better than people I've known for decades because I've dug that deeply into their lives. And they have things to say. They want to be known, they want to be heard, and they want to be respected for who they were and the potential of who they are now. Because I personally believe that there is another side, and it's a place where we can do better and come to be all that we meant to be or wanted to be here on earth. And genealogy is a way of getting there. I know nobody else in my family is as interested as I am. Some people in my family are lovely and they actually put up with my stories. And I call and I say, "Oh my gosh, you won't believe what I just found." And they're like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. That's really cool." Um, Other people in my family don't care at all. They just don't care. They don't want to know. They don't want to hear. They don't care.
Hmm.
And um, so part of genealogy is being a conduit for memory because I'm going to die too. So it's not like I'm the memory, right?
Hmm.
It's more like I'm the gatherer. I'm a custodian. I have a lot of family photos and things like that. They're not mine. They belong to my niece and nephew. They belong to everybody who comes after me because I don't have kids. And so I'm the custodian. I'll do the best that I can with scanning those things and documenting those things and putting them someplace safe. But um, it's about connection. It's about not forgetting. If there are 50 ways to say it. I guess it was Eloise Wiesel who said the quote. But if we forget, we're doomed to repeat.
Hmm.
And that's very true with bad things. But also, we don't all need to invent the wheel and then reinvent the wheel and then reinvent the wheel. We can actually learn from other people's experience, or experiences. And I feel like it's a fundamental way that since I really started working heavily on my own tree after taking, like a little hiatus when I was in college, a little hiatus when I was in law school, that kind of thing. When I picked back up specifically in about 2009, which was when I joined the church, I found that was I don't know. I don't know exactly how to say it, but I feel like it's sort of my job to put things together and to do the remembering and to fit the stories together and understand where I may be romanticizing or making it up a little myself, but understand also where the evidence is and what things look like and how people really lived and show respect for that. I never realized I would be so very much of a respect your elders kind of chick. I am. Respect me. I didn't ever realize that I was like that, but I really am. And I think that my ancestors deserve to be known and to be remembered and to have their names said every once in a while and to be heard and stuff like that. I'm not the first person to go through the things that I have gone through in my life. My ancestors and other people's ancestors too went through it. So, this year, one of the greatest things that we can do is learn from the flu pandemic of 1918, 1919, and every time there's a war, learn from the past one and all that kind of stuff. But also, when you make dinner, remember that somebody had a coal stove that they had to keep burning all the time, instead of a gas range or an electric range or something like that, and remember what the quality of their life was. And think of the fact that the air smelled different. I wonder what the air smelled like. I do. The quality of light is different because of pollution and, I don't know, climate change. These kinds of things are the things that I think genealogy is about, staying in touch with the really fundamental stuff about who our ancestors were and that it actually does inform who we are. We don't have to be a slave to their pasts. We don't have to just live their lives. We can exceed them and everything like that, but that doesn't mean that we don't have to also respect them. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I'm sure it will for people watching and due to watch this on YouTube. And sorry for the people that aren't able to watch this on Instagram. I can only do videos up until 15 minutes, and we have quadrupled that. So, and probably quintuple it. I don't know. Is that the word? Probably is. What advice? Because obviously with times are changing with people, myself, and two people watching that are young genealogists like myself. What advice would you give to young people starting out in genealogy?
I think that what I'm learning right now is extremely important, and that is that you have to know history. Right now, I'm teaching myself all of Western Europe's history, all of it. And the reason is Western Europe provided the slave trade and colonization and the extermination of other people's cultures first. There you go. Okay. So what I'm going to do is start in Europe and come over to the United States, right? But I'm going to start in Europe and go down to the African continent and then over to the Middle East and then over to the Far East. And I give myself 5 years. So I'm listening to books constantly. I'm watching documentaries, particularly on History Hit and on YouTube all the time. BBC, thank you. ITV, thank you. Loving everything that I find. I want to be able to recite all of these kings and queens and things like that. Are they my ancestors? Yeah, actually they are. That's kind of common for Americans, for white Americans whose people have been here for a couple hundred years. But that's not the important part. It's not just because they're my relatives. It's more like I use the fact that I know that they're my relatives to make it more personal. So studying history, starting with where you are and radiating out, both in location and in time, is very important. The other thing that's really important is figuring out how you learn. And this is probably more important than anything because it predates the ability to learn history. I didn't realize that I am a visual person. I'm a visual learner. I didn't realize that I had ADD because that was not a thing that was diagnosed when I was in school. And it manifests differently in girls from how it manifests in boys. So nobody would have nailed it down. I am also bipolar and I'm medicated. Everything's fine. Well, I'm grumpy, but whatever. But the taking care of understanding how my mind works is really important. So when I started teaching people at church, and they were 8 years old, seriously, to 90 years old. Some were developmentally disabled in some way. And then I also had to use records in German, French, Latin, Spanish, and I also taught a woman who spoke sign language because she was fully non-hearing. And it taught me that different people learn different ways and that I have to master the fundamentals before I can teach other people, and that the way that I learn is actually pretty darn common. I don't learn very well from books. I'm listening to books, and I re-listen to chapters, and I will be really listening to entire books, and I re-watch documentaries again and again and again. I've been teaching myself the Wars of the Roses for 4 years now because I want to be able to rattle it all off with just a whiteboard. So finding out how it is that your mind works and understanding that if your mind works differently from how somebody is presenting something to you, you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. You're just different from that person. And you need to find people to learn from who have patience with the way that you learn or who learn and teach the way that you do. And that underpins everything. Develop systems that work for you, the way that you keep files, whether you keep files at all. I don't keep paper files. I just don't. Other people have notebooks and all kinds. No, I don't do that. When you back stuff up, do you do everything in your head? I do. I can tell you people's names and cousins and, oh yeah, well, Edward Kohanek, he's a cousin through the paces because of this marriage over here. I never met Edward Kohanek, but there it is. It's a DNA match. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast, but I can tell you all about that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just how my mind works. So the systems and all that kind of stuff, you just have to please yourself. If you want to get certified, get certified. If you don't, don't. I am never going to get certified. I already took the bar exam more than once. I am never taking a test again, ever. Nobody can make me. I don't want to be certified. And I don't want to write great big books about other people's families. It's boring. Other people can do that. I like building trees and passing them on. That's what I like to do. I'm a technician. That's all I want to do. So I would say it's just about that kind of stuff. Just be kind to yourself and get to know yourself and trust yourself, which comes with time.
Fair enough. So, I'm getting to the end of my questions. So, if anyone else has any ones they want to ask Carolyn, please stick them in, and I can do the same thing that I did with PJ's earlier and bring it up on the screen. It's so easier. It's much easier when you're able to do that rather than reading it out. You have a rubbish connection, and you can just stick it up, and the person can see it if I have a rubbish connection or not. One of the reasons why I like this a little more than Instagram, but spoiler now, the one that it's the one after the next one will be done on Instagram, so I will have to go back to that. So my last question is, as there are more young people getting into genealogy, do you see, in your opinion, that there are sufficient places for them to, connect with people their own age and learn about things and just do genealogy with their peers?
To do work together, that's something that you'll have to create. I believe that genealogy actually is a very creative thing. And I think that all along, genealogists have had to create their own relevance. For a long time, genealogists were little old blue-haired ladies trying to prove that they were related to kings and people who came over on the Mayflower and all that kind of stuff. And that was pretty much it. And people didn't really respect it. And historians really didn't respect it because they were like, yeah, but you made that up and you're lying. And so I don't know. People had clubs and societies and things like that. I kind of tend to join things and then immediately disparage the thing that I've just joined because that's part of what makes me lovable, I guess. But I think that there are ways to use genealogy that we didn't used to think of. For instance, one of the things that I'm going to do, because sooner or later this contract will end and I will be done with contact tracing, most likely. I'm thinking I want to do forensic genealogical work. A lawyer approached me about that a couple years ago and said, we have people who leave wills and we don't know who the stuff is supposed to go to because we can't find living relatives. We need somebody to help us with that. I said, really? Okay. Well, cards upstairs. I'm going to be giving her a call one of these days. And probably every other law firm in town. But it's possible to get together as a group of people and to work a single goal, like a reparational tree. Yeah. Reparational tree is a great way to do it, right? You can do the same thing. Certainly in Ireland, you can say, well, okay, so suppose you want to take some famous person in history, or maybe just some person who was well-known in your town. Just that straightforward. Doesn't have to be somebody who's, it doesn't have to be Theobald Wolfe Tone or somebody like that. It can be anybody, and work the records as a group, do a Zoom and work the tree together. You can do that. You can be from all over and do that, and be creative about it. But think about all of the ways in which finding living current day people is a good thing to do, how it somehow serves someone. One of the great things that I see as being a possibility is working with the imprisoned, with the incarcerated. This is part of reparational genealogy that I have just not been able to get to yet because of COVID. But what I want to do is approach the families of people who are incarcerated and say, what say I do work for your family, and then I write to and from, with the incarcerated member of your household, and that way this person is getting mail, and this person is learning about family, and this person is being engaged in a way that he or she would not have been engaged in otherwise, and hopefully comes out of imprisonment with a better, stronger sense of self. And something that he or she didn't have before. Anybody can do that. Anybody at all can do that. And doing that in a group, even better. Think about what that would feel like. You're stuck away from everybody. And then all of a sudden you've got kids writing to you about your family and asking you questions and telling you things they found. How cool is that? That would be something that I would want to do. If I were in high school, I would be like spearheading a major thing, doing that, But I think that it's possible to create or to find project work that will help and be a tool of social justice, which I think is very important, especially in the hands of the young, because you guys have got, more years on the planet than I do yet ahead of you. But also because your creativity is probably greater than mine. My mind thinks in channels now. I've got certain ways of looking at the world. And because you can teach each other. And I wish I had people to learn with. That would still be cool. And teaching and learning from one another makes you so much better and so much stronger at what you do and at who you are as a person in the world.
Fair enough. And I think I agree with what you said, that you're very true in all you brought up there. And I think with that coming up on 1 hour and 20 minutes, but it was worth it. Yeah, totally was. No, it was perfectly fine. So with that, I think we shall end. So I
Sounds
think
good.
the people who joined in and commented and liked and whatever, still not good at this. But to those of you watching on YouTube, when I eventually post this up, whenever it'll be, like, comment, subscribe, share, do that stuff, whatever it is. And join me next week with my guest. So with that, I shall end. So bye, everyone.